It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Monday, April 21st, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that is reading between a lot of lines from Locker Cleanout Day.
Yeah, you got to do some extra digging.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, and thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. I've been podcasting about the Flyers, the NHL, and hockey for a decade now, and I'm here with prospect expert and Flyers credentialed reporter for 19 plus years, Russ Cohen. To keep up with our latest episodes and Flyers news, you can find us at Locked On Flyers on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Twitter. And of course, here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The season is over, but we keep going on a daily basis, at least through free agency. And there is going to be a ton to talk about this offseason for the Philadelphia Flyers. And that starts with Locker Cleanout Day. We'll get to our Nemesis of the week later in the show. We're going to keep that going, and we're going to start doing our summer polls as well in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for that. But I think you have to really first look at the comments from general manager Danny Briere, as well as interim head coach Brad Shaw. But Danny Briere, obviously, he went last over the 2 days, which is appropriate, I think. And obviously, the biggest question on everybody's mind was this coaching hire, and has he come up with a job description or qualities he wants, and what does he think of what Brad Shaw did? And I just thought all of it was, I think, in some ways surprising with how little they've done in that process thus far, but also the fact that he hedged so much about Brad Shaw.
Well, did he though? I think here's the thing. I think Brad gave us the secret without really giving us the secret, and that was he said he's part of the coaching search. And you're not going to be the next head coach if you're part of the coaching search, but I don't even think the assistants should be part of the coaching search. But that's a topic for another day. But I think by him telling us that means he's not getting the job, but he's probably coming back as the assistant, and the next coach will have to accept Brad as the assistant. I think that's what we're expecting now.
I think so to some degree. I think that when you look at what some of the players had to say about Brad Shaw, I think it does telegraph that to some degree, because, they talked specifically about what he had to say about the blue line. And we're going to get to that later in the week.
Yes.
And dig into our evaluation of the blue line versus their self-evaluation versus what Brad Shaw had to say about them as the defensive coach for, 90% of the season. I think, that's an important conversation to have and where those differences lie. But yeah, it just felt like Brad Shaw wasn't really tooting his own horn in the way that you should if you want that job, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think he tried to. I think when asked about it, he did. I think the issue is sometimes players just perceive you as X, meaning, hey, Brad's the defensive specialist. That's what he is. And I think it was well illustrated when I asked him about the exit interviews, and he said, I didn't really set up any, but I told the guys that doors open. If you want to come in, we'll talk. And he said 6 to 7 guys came in, and was mostly the guys that are on the defense and penalty kill. And I think that's telling.
Right. I think so. And so when you look at this coaching hiring process here, Briere was asked if that was the top of his to-do list, and he said yes, but it wasn't a resounding yes. It was yeah,
I'll get to it.
By default. He hasn't started a short list yet. And by the way, we've already had 2 firings in the league so far, with Laviolette in New York, and the Ducks fired their coach as well. So, they haven't really put together that job description. They haven't cast that wide net. Now, he was asked about the qualities of the coach, and, he said communication is important. They can come in and teach. And, that's all stuff we've heard before, from before they hired Torts, to be honest.
Correct.
And he was asked if they will swing the pendulum to a softer hand a little bit, versus Torts. And I think he had a fair answer to that question, is that there's really nobody like Torts out
Well,
there.
there is one, Joe
Well,
Quenneville,
yeah, well, that's a whole other topic.
but he is.
I know. I just I'm in denial about that.
I know.
We we do not want Joel Quenneville to come coach the Philadelphia Flyers, but I think it's fair to ask about swinging the pendulum the other way. He seemed to think that that's not really.
Yeah, he's not necessarily going that way. That's the vibe we got. Here's the other thing, though, and you and I have both hired and fired in our own days, or
Mhm.
old corporate days, and so your boss would always say to you, "Hey, give me a list of who we're looking for in these open spots," and you had to give it to him by tomorrow. Like, you didn't get like all this time. The Flyers are competing against 6 other teams. They've got to step it up. Like, they're not the
At
number one
least,
choice. Yeah, at
right?
least that we know of today. And so
Right.
they're not the number one choice. And so, like, if I'm the other people above Danny, I've got to be asking him for that list now.
Right. And he was asked about considering the timeline to ramp up as coach, and he said, "Yeah, but again, I just don't feel like there was enough urgency
I
that he
agree. I
projected,
mean, I
right?"
think based on the last time he talked about this to now, I think it's fair to say they have made no progress.
Yeah, I think so. I think when you look at what Bradshaw had to say versus what Briere had to say about accountability, I think that was also telling, because Briere, I think, seemed to think that the biggest takeaway from the Torts era was the accountability factor, and
Mhm.
that the players learned how to be accountable for their play on the ice. And Bradshaw, on the other hand, when he was kind of asked about that in a roundabout sort of way, kind of indicated that you have to tailor accountability to the individual player and ask them what
Mhm.
keeps them accountable. Whereas Torts was more of a blanket, ice
Right.
time is your accountability, right?
Right. Yes.
And Bradshaw sees that as a tool, but not the end all be all. And those are very different approaches. And I don't think Briere recognizes that in a lot of ways.
Right. I think those are very different approaches. And look, we as media, what we recognize is if you're going to talk about accountability, then how about the 3 players that didn't talk?
I think there's a lot to that. We'll
There's
get
no
into that.
accountability there.
Yeah, we'll get a little bit into that in the next segment when
Yes.
we dig into a few of the top players, for sure. But I think that that is a huge factor. Like,
Mhm.
accountability for a rebuilding team and taking that next step, I think it's a really important aspect, and it's got to be an important aspect of the new coaching hire and how they
For
approach
sure.
accountability, especially with this group being as tight knit as they are, and as supportive of each other as they are. Like, you can't put cracks into that armor
No.
in
And I
in
think
order to be successful here.
post games there is accountability. I think now I've just seen less as the season ended for that final accountability. That's where I'm starting to have a question.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think the other big thing on Briere's to-do list that we talked about last week is, the end of the season. Now what? That goaltending conversation is huge. And Briere was asked specifically about the Kolosov situation, and what he had to say was that Kolosov said to him. So we're hearing this
I know it's
secondhand.
all secondhand stuff.
Right, that it was a tough year for him. Briere said that Kolosov said that he learned a lot, but he can't talk ab Briere can't talk about it, and that's, I think, not okay in a lot of ways.
It's not because he can't talk about it, but we can. He's not in Lehigh. He's not
Mhm.
supporting the team in the playoffs. He literally just used Lehigh as a means to an end. That's pretty obvious now. And so he was up for the NHL pay. We talked about that. That was obviously something that was important to him. But the problem is when Danny talks about possibly going on the outside to get another goalie, well, you already overpaid for Fedotov based on his results. And we talked about that when they signed him, that it was a high paycheck. You already did that.
Who, by the way, in his own exit interview, did not really acknowledge going to the AHL as a realistic option for him when
Agree.
asked if he would do that. And so that's, that's right there. You have two goaltenders who won't go to the AHL
Under contract
under contract.
for another year.
That's not going to get you anywhere here.
No. And then, so like, as an example, if you go out and you're trying to get a goalie and that goalie's agent says, well, what are you doing with the other two? What's he going to say?
Yeah.
It's going to be hard to get a goalie until you resolve this.
Right. So it seems pretty clear that at least one of those two have to go, and figuring out a way to get one of them to go is going to be very difficult in this league, given the fact that neither one of them are willing to go down. That's going to be a tough sell for a trade.
Let's talk about tough sells. So let's just say one of them decides to go. You still have another one there that doesn't want to play in the AHL, and now you're trying to get a free agent goalie. What free agent's going to come in and be a part of a three-way goalie system where he's going to try and get playing time? Nobody good.
No, it's like, it is an almost impossible situation. And there is a possibility that they may end up having to trade both of them depending on what they decide to do moving forward.
But you have to do it soon, because if you hit July and this is not resolved, you got a problem. You
do. You really do. So this is another conversation we're going to dig more into as the off season continues. We'll do, I'm sure, multiple episodes on goaltending.
It's
in
the Flyers.
Coming
How could you not
weeks.
do multiple episodes on goaltending?
Yeah. And in the meantime, there are some, I think, players that really stood out in terms of their exit interview notes and thoughtful things they had to say. So we're going to dig into what Matvei Michkov had to say, what Sean Couturier had to say, and what Cam York had to say coming up next. The Stanley Cup playoffs are here, and if you've never been to a live NHL playoff game, it's unlike anything else. Tough note on that for Flyers fans there, but the intensity, the speed, and the energy in the building is absolutely next level. And thanks to Gametime, getting in the door is easier and more affordable than ever. Gametime is the fastest way to grab those playoff tickets, even for those must-see matchups. And the prices actually drop as puck drop gets closer with those last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% for sports, concerts, comedy, and my favorite, the theater. Their all-in pricing shows the total cost up front, so you don't have any surprise fees at checkout. And they can even show you panoramic seat views so you know exactly what you're getting into before you buy. And with Gametime ticket coverage, I know I'm protected, whether it's cancellation protection or job loss assurance. They have a 24-hour return guarantee. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, on tomorrow's show, we are going to continue our locker room cleanout day conversations, digging into more of what some of the other players had to say. Plus Phantoms Tuesday, we've got the playoff matchup set against Wilkes-Barre Scranton, which is
yippee,
tough draw. And we'll be answering your mailbag questions on the Wednesday show. So get those in. You can email us at lockdownflyers@gmail.com. Send us a message on any of our socials or comment over on YouTube. Now, we mentioned that we did not hear from Alexei Kolosov at the end of the season. We also did not hear from Egor Zamula for unknown reasons at this point, which is kind of weird, honestly.
But because when asked, I mean, Haley Simon asked, and Danny was just like, "Oh yeah, we spoke, but yeah, you know." And then he gave whatever explanation. It's like, why can't he speak?
Yeah, and Carson Bjarnason was asked for as well, but he had gone to Lehigh already at that point, I guess, so he was not available to the media. But the biggest question mark is Rasmus Ristolainen, and especially given the extensive injury conversation that Briere had on locker cleanout day with, he had surgery a few weeks ago, and the timeline for recovery wasn't until perhaps a week or two into the next season. That's big news. And to not have Risto there was not cool.
No, it's not, because obviously there's a lot of questions. Now
Mhm.
there's going to be a lot of speculation. I mean, I can pretty much tell you he's a dead asset to the organization, because even if
Yeah.
he is playing when the trade deadline comes in, you're getting like a third, fourth round pick. That's it. That's all you're
Yep.
getting for Risto now. It's the
Nobody
way
can
they,
trust that he'll be healthy.
no,
Nobody.
nobody.
Yeah, it's a real shame, that the timing of it was such that they couldn't trade him at the deadline this year because of the injury,
Right.
and then
And
now it's
it's similar injury too. So that's the other
yeah.
worry. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. As far as the other players go, I think Matvei Michkov is the player that had the most successful season for the Flyers this year, like pretty clearly. And I think when you look at what Danny Briere had to say about him and that what Matvei Michkov had to say himself, it is unbelievable how much this kid is driven, like in terms of him wanting to learn everything, soak everything up, whether it's the language, whether it's systems, whether it's, discipline and getting to be a better player. People watch him at work and are so impressed. And I think that is huge for a kid like him who wants to be a superstar in this league. I think, he has the attitude at least to
Yeah.
work to get him there.
Yeah, he always did. I mean, we heard it at the draft. I don't think anything's
Mhm.
changed. That's why I say by after next year, he will also start to ask questions like, when is this going to get better? When is that going to get better?
Mhm.
Because like he can only do so much as one player. And so, like Danny said, yes, he has more to learn, and he does. And when at the point where he's almost not needing to learn that much anymore, just little nuances, then it's going to be like, what do you put next to him? Because
Right.
that's the only way he's going to continue to progress. So that's going to be the challenge, because he's going to be there soon.
Yeah, and, he's not happy with his scoring results this
Right.
season.
Well, he wanted to
Uh,
win. Wanted to win the Calder. That's obvious. And so, even though he may have led in goals, he wanted to be the complete package, and it came up a little short. It's okay.
I thought it was interesting. He said that John Tortorella taught him a lot, and he will take a lot away, but not everything. And I
Well, of
think
course, it won't be everything, because
yeah,
there was a lot of strife there too.
yeah, yeah. But I do think he seems to have the right attitude moving forward.
He
I
does.
think it was very good for him to say that he doesn't like to play low minutes, that he learned he needs more minutes to thrive. And that's 100% true. We
We
saw
talked
that.
about that for a while. Yeah,
Yeah. And for him to state that out loud to the media, I think is a really important thing for him to
it
do
is.
to establish himself as the center of this team moving forward. And I think that was a good thing.
It is. I'm going to see. I think it's going to be interesting to see next year how all that's handled by the players. I think right now
Mhm.
everybody's like, yeah, Matvei's cool and he's great and all, but like when he becomes the best player on the team, how's that going to play? That'll be interesting.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, Sean Couturier had some interesting things to say as well. I think it was just really important that he established himself as the leader of this team in a way that I felt like he hadn't before. He was named the captain last season toward the tail end, or not the tail end, but it was at the Stadium Series game. So this was his first full season as Flyers team captain. And I think that when he talked about how much like the not playing that Torts benching him or like putting him on the fourth line really affected his game, and that once he got back up in the lineup, his confidence came back, and we saw that in his
Hmm.
play, right? And
Yeah.
for him to be like, no, I'm the captain and I'm going to tell it like it is now, I think was a slight change in his demeanor from the past.
I mean, I think it is, but I don't think it's fair. I mean, fans can say whatever they want, but I don't think it's fair for the fans to say, well, he didn't stand up to Torts. He explained it really well.
Yeah, I
Basically,
thought so.
when Torts is basically saying, I want a run and gun team, and the captain and Couturier said, like, that's not my game. He didn't want to alter anything to that. He didn't want to figure out how to put Sean in the lineup. His answer was, I'll just put him on the fourth line because that's the easiest thing to do. And then I'll keep going with my vision here,
Mhm.
instead of working his way in, working him in. And that was the disappointing part.
Right.
And obviously there was almost no communication about it. So how do you expect a player to feel at that point? Like, you've been at a job when you're being totally overlooked and mismanaged. Like, there's only so much fight anybody has in them with that.
Right. And then, obviously with the other core players that got traded away, I
Right.
think like that support for that message that Couturier could have communicated was then suddenly yanked away from him.
Right.
And I think that affected him
It did. He's a
very
human.
deeply.
No, he's not
Yeah.
the same player. We know that. He acknowledges that. So it's
Right.
like, but they didn't make an attempt until late in towards his reign to get the best out of him. They just decided, well, we did that a year before. It's not working now, so we're just going to push you aside. And essentially, that's what they did.
Yeah, I think so. But I just felt very proud of Sean Couturier, the way
Yeah.
he handled himself in that exit interview and
And he
just
could have
being
said more.
really,
Trust me, he
he
held back.
could have. Right. I just thought he was forthcoming enough to get his point
Right.
across, but didn't like cross a line. And I think
Right.
that's very captain behavior.
It
So
was.
I appreciated that quite a bit. Cam York, on the other hand, wow. I feel like in a lot of ways he had some of the most interesting things to
He
say. And
was the most
obviously,
interesting.
yeah, and obviously we know that Cam York was involved in whatever precipitating incident led to the dismissal of John
Right.
Tortorella. And so I thought York handled kind of that aspect of the questioning, which didn't directly get into that, but it kind of end arounded it. And I thought York answered it pretty thoughtfully.
Well, he was
But
classy about it. He didn't have to be
mhm.
classy about it.
No, he did not, and that's what I was, like, impressed with how he did that. I do, however, he knows he has to get better. It's very clear he knows he has to work on things, but I feel like he doesn't know what those things are accurately based on what he had to say, but I don't know if you agree with me on that.
I do partially, and it partially gets into another player that we're going to dig into more another day. But I think it was Charlie that asked Owen Tippett, "Did you know you took like 100 less shots this year?" And he had
Yeah,
no idea. And
yeah,
the only reason that's bad is because you have a whole analytics department that probably gave a report to the coach to show the player, and it never got communicated. So I feel like a lot of this never got communicated to players. So as an example, Cam said, "Hey, one of the things I have to do is get the shot through more." I
yep,
know that. Also, a shooting coach would help that, but I've gotten tired of talking about that, even though 3 players
right,
on the team could use it desperately, right? But this is something that doesn't really get fixed. This is something it's almost thrust on the player, and if the player doesn't fix it, they don't fix it. But the most damning thing was when he said he could just feel he was never going to be asked to play on the power play, and he wasn't.
mhm.
And that's damning. As bad as that power play is, Danny could talk about little baby steps, and it wasn't baby steps. It was
Oh my
nothing.
god,
It was
that's a whole other
that's
thing.
a whole other day's work of work. But the point is, he's a great distributor on the power play. It's just his shot misses the net or doesn't get through. We know this. They
Yep.
just abandoned that rather than trying to have him work on it and bring him back and rehabilitate him, because you get more out of Cam York if you have him doing that. So certainly he feels like he could still do it, but the team abandoned that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. The other thing, Cam York said he thought he played better after the benching, that he was gripping his stick less tight,
Yeah.
that when he plays freer and not thinking too hard, that he does better.
Well, he said he
But
played freer under Brad.
right,
Like
right,
like that's a big
right.
thing.
But I don't think he necessarily played better under Brad. I think he
No,
played
but he played
freer.
freer in his mind, at least. He
Yes.
probably felt like he wasn't shackled.
Yeah, that's where I just feel like there's the little disconnect between what
Mhm.
he was feeling versus what he needs to work on. I think he has a very false sense of the success of the pairing with Drysdale, and we're going to
Well,
get more into
clearly, if it were Brad, he wouldn't do it
yeah,
ever again. So Brad's around, it's
right,
not happening. Those guys love
right,
it, but those guys aren't gonna see it again.
right, and we'll dig into those numbers
Right.
and that conversation on Wednesday, but I think like there are some things he does have a realistic sense about. He
Yes.
didn't think he was as good laterally this year. That's
Yeah.
100% true. And I think that this will be a good clean slate for him. I really do.
Yeah, I
But
mean, he's gonna only get a bridge deal now, like, that's pretty
yep,
obvious. So,
yep,
like, I don't know what's gonna happen with Cam in the future. It does seem like he's staying. So, okay, that's fine. I'm not against Cam York staying. I'd rather him play on his own side. I'd rather them all stop that nonsense of playing the other side. I mean, at this point, Sanheim doesn't care, but I think Cam does. And so I think you have to be this season, you have to see the most that you can get out of Cam York so you have an idea of what you want to pay him in the future, because you don't want to pay him the Neil Pionk money. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I think so. But all right, we'll have a lot more to talk about this week related to these interviews and our thoughts about the team and how that compares. In the meantime, it is Monday, so we will have our Nemesis of the week coming up next.
Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your pair of controllers, subscribe or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops and Avowed. As easily as it is to stream your favorite shows, it's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. With 4K streaming, you have access to more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and more. You could also play high-quality Xbox games at a fraction of the cost of a console. Already have a console? A Fire TV Stick 4K device is more affordable and easier to travel with, allowing you to take your or your kids' games wherever you want to plug in. Head to Amazon.com, Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K second generation, Fire TV Stick 4K Max, first and second generation, and Fire TV Cube third generation.
All right. We did mention those couple of coaching vacancies earlier in the show, and those are the only two official vacancies at the moment. There are 3 now interim coaches that we don't, as of recording, have official news on yet. Of course, the Flyers job, the Bruins job, and the Blackhawks job are there. So the competition will be fierce, and
You will.
we'll get into who fits where best as this offseason continues leading up to this hiring, because apparently we've got some time now because they haven't even made a short list yet. So all that being said, that's a perfect segue into a nemesis of the week here. And last week, I talked about, the excitement of the playoffs approaching, but the Flyers not being in it again, and how kind of frustrating that was. And, I think we've seen some of the playoffs so far, and it's definitely exciting. I loved that Jets Blues game. Game 1 was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And but of course, in the other Western series that got going between the Avs and Dallas, I think, we're probably sort of rooting for Dallas just because of the draft pick possibilities.
I didn't pick them. I can tell you that.
I know I didn't either. So I picked the Avs too in our preview, but I think from a rooting perspective versus a picking perspective, there is that. You talked about the NFL draft and how it affected your approach to mock drafts, and how it's just really
my disdain for them.
Yes, and because they've gotten clickbaity to generate conversation as opposed to being realistic in terms of who might pick who moving forward. And I get that too, because sometimes I read some lists and I'm like, what are these people smoking?
Right.
This team would never pick this player, but you got to talk about it. So I get it, and we're going to talk about it too. Mm-hmm. But we're more talking about it in terms of the who these players are, what they bring to the table, and how they might fit with the Flyers.
Right.
Pick them or not pick them. Right.
Right.
That's kind of the approach that we take here. But for me this week, I think, again, based on what Danny Briere had to say, the nemesis this week has to be the waiting for the new head coach and what it means for the team moving forward. And a lot of the players mentioned, the uncertainty in a lot of ways, and that I believe it was Travis Sanheim who was asked directly if he was involved in the hiring process.
Yes.
And, he's like, well, I talked to Danny Briere about a lot of things, like trying to smoke
Right.
and mirrors it,
Yeah.
but a little bit, which fair,
Yeah,
absolutely
sure.
fair that he did that. But I'll be interested to see if we'll ever get insight into who or if any of the players
No,
are
we'll
involved
probably
in
just
the
hear it from,
process.
insiders.
So, what's your nemesis?
So my nemesis is, and I can't get an answer from anybody on this, why in the world is the best series in the playoffs, the Panthers against the Lightning, starting on the 22nd? Nobody has an answer for this. Why? Series have already started. This is days from starting. Well, days as we record, but still another day.
Mhm.
Why? Why is it taking so long for this series to get rolling? This is the series everybody wants to see, and now this is the one everybody's going to wait for. It makes no sense from a scheduling standpoint. Like, I don't know. Like, there had to be a better answer than this.
Yeah, I think so. It's weird. It
It
again,
is.
I mean, I was trying not to talk about the scheduling again because I've done it a lot
Well, I did.
recently. But so I'm glad you brought it up this time. Just to show that there's just some weird things. Now it could be building availability,
Sure, but for
there's
this
all of
many
that.
days, like it could have
I
started
know.
3 days ago.
Yeah. And we're still waiting for at least again as of recording what day the draft lottery is going to be. Like
Right.
let's get on it,
Yeah.
NHL. Let us know.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going on behind the scenes there, but there's
It's
some
a mystery.
questions. There are questions for sure. We have some more questions about the Flyers players coming out of this season. We're going to talk more locker cleanout day takeaways with some of the other top players tomorrow, as well as have our Phantoms Tuesday. We're going to wrap up the regular season and preview the playoff series against the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. And as a reminder, we always want to hear from you. So if you've got mailbag questions or Flyers thoughts on all of this, let us know on any of our socials at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail or comment on our YouTube channel. I'm Rachel. I'm on Blue Sky and Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology on the same socials, SPORTSOLOGY.
Thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen. Today, for your next listen, check out the all-new Locked On NHL Game Night. It's every game, every night until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. You can get local analysis on a national scale on NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL, available on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Have a great day, everyone.